Bon Clay's popularity is no secret, but just why is he so beloved by the fans? How could someone who started off as a random villain for Sanji to fight in Alabasta transform into one of the most legendary characters in manga history? Well, today I'll be covering every single bit of information we have about Bon Clay to find the answer to that. We know almost nothing about his past, only that he ate the Mane Mane no Mi sometime after the death of the previous user. This ability was able to perfectly imitate anyone, from their voice to their body, despite gender and size. This power would prove to be unbelievably useful and play a huge role throughout Bon Clay's entire life. Sometime later, he was recruited to join Baroque works by the warlord of the sea Crocodile, and at this point it's important to mention the situation of Bon Clay's gender. He has a very fluid view of it, seeing himself as both male and female. He mentions later that he was a big fan of Emporio Ivankov, who he called the greatest Okama, and an idol to Okamas worldwide, and could have been an inspiration for his ideology. Now with that context, in Baroque works, the agents come in pairs, one male assigned a number and one female assigned a day, all except for Bon Clay, who was named both Mr. 2 and Bon Clay, a festival in Japan, probably at his request, and also a testament to his power, as he was able to handle both positions single-handedly. The only mission we know he was assigned before he appeared in the story officially was to use his power to get close to King Cobra and copy his face, which would be essential for Crocodile's plans later. His first official appearance came in chapter 129, where he was sent to Little Garden after Mr. 3 was defeated by the Straw Hat Pirates, being ordered to kill him for his failure. But by the time they arrived, Mr. 3 was missing. They followed the route between Alabasta and Little Garden and didn't find Mr. 3 along the way like they were supposed to. He was extremely stressed, since as he was assigned to kill Mr. 3, Mr. 1 would be assigned to kill him if he failed this mission. So he ordered them to sail back to Alabasta to catch Mr. 3 along the way. On the trip back, they encountered some smoke, but Bon Clay ordered his crew to ignore it and sail through, wasting no time as his life depended on this mission. But while in the smoke, Bon Clay ended up stuck on the end of a fishing pole holding a duck. Long story, but he panicked and let go, falling into the ocean, certain death for any Delphi user, but he was saved by the Straw Hats. He was extremely thankful, explaining that he couldn't swim because of his fruit, and when Usopp asked him what kind he had, he decided to entertain them by showing off his power. He touched Luffy's face and transformed into a perfect replica of him, down to the voice. He turned back and repeated this with the other members, to the astonishment of the crew. He didn't want to show any more of the transformations he had to keep up his sense of secrecy, but was easily convinced by the adoration and cheers of the Straw Hats. He cycled through the faces he'd gathered over the years until he reached the face of King Cobra. Unbeknownst to him, Cobra's own daughter was on the ship and started to realize who he was. But before she could, Bon Clay's crew had come back and found him, and so it was time for him to say goodbye. He said that every voyage has to come to an end, but friendship isn't determined by how much time you've spent together. Bon Clay treasures friendships and bonds more than anything else. We don't know exactly why. It could have been from experiences in his past or just the ideology he built up throughout his life, but he truly loves and cares for everyone he calls a friend, and will do his best to be as good of a friend as he can be. But for now, it was time for them to part. But they all wished to meet again someday, but that day would come sooner than expected, as Bon Clay's crew announced his full code name, and the Straw Hats immediately realized who he was. They would soon be enemies, but Bon Clay was none the wiser, and was in a great mood after making new friends, which at the very least took a load off his mind, and made him less stressed out about the mission he was on. He was ultimately unable to find Mr. 3, but luckily Crocodile didn't kill him for that, as Bon Clay's Delphi would be vital in his upcoming plans, so instead called him and the other top agents to a meeting. Bon Clay was now completely relaxed, without the threat of death hanging on him, so went back to his goofy ways, doing his ballerina routine with his crew all the way to the meeting point. He was bickering with the other agents while waiting, when Mr. 1 stormed in, throwing Bon Clay's subordinates into the building, beaten to near death. This enraged Bon Clay. Friendship and bonds are the most important things to him, so doing this to his subordinates was inexcusable, so he had no choice but to attack Mr. 1. He kicked him through a wall, and they were both gearing up for a fight to the death, but were stopped by the other agents. This scene really shows the depths of Bon Clay's loyalty. He had just been stressed and terrified a few days earlier about being hunted down and killed by Mr. 1, but after that very same person nearly killed his subordinates, he didn't even hesitate to pick a fight with him. Bon Clay does what's most impressive for a person to do. He ignores and conquers his biggest fears with courage and strength for the sake of those he cares about. After this, they're transported to Crocodile's casino, where his true identity is revealed to them, which shocks them all to the core, including Bon Clay. Crocodile was acting as a hero to the people of Alabasta, but in reality he was plotting on their downfall the entire time. Banklei was upset that he'd been working for a pirate, but after Crocodile reveals his plan of conquering Alabasta, Banklei is excited at the prospect. This is the first blatant showing of Banklei's darker side. He seems like the type to be very loyal and caring to his friends, but isn't concerned about people he isn't connected to. For example, the average person in Alabasta, who would have a much harder life, if not worse, be killed by Crocodile's plans. But this is just where his character starts, and he'll experience a lot of growth later on. But this is also where he discovered that his new friends the Straw Hats were actually their enemies. Crocodile then demonstrated what would happen if his agents failed him, saying that what he hated most was when someone failed at the crucial moment. This emphasized the importance that all of them complete their final missions perfectly, and for Banklei, his was the most gruesome of all. He impersonated King Cobra, went to the city of Nanohana, and ordered his royal guards to burn it all to the ground. A little boy protested this, and he responded by kicking him away heartlessly. He was then confronted by the revolutionary leader Koza, and admitted to all the crimes that Cobra was framed for, which brought out pure rage in Koza, as countless people had died believing in the king, who'd been nothing but kind before this, but Banklei was destroying that image with his very own hands, and then to finish it off, commanded that Koza be shot, while smiling about the destruction that was being laid on the city. This is by far the lowest point of Banklei's character, borderline evil, and he took it even further when he impersonated Usopp, a person he called a friend. But he would get what he deserved when he faced off with Sanji. Banklei used the full scope of his fruit once he figured out Sanji's weakness to women. This worked well until Sanji outsmarted him and the tide of the battle turned, with Banklei getting heavily outclassed, but Sanji's injuries from earlier in the fight were slowing him down as well, so they were almost even going into the final clash. But in the end, Sanji came out on top, albeit barely. He told Sanji to kill him, as the organization would do so anyway. With his impersonation job being done, they had no reason to keep him alive, but Sanji refused. He said they had a good fight, and that was all. This shocked Banklei, rattled his worldview. Banklei thought that he was living proof of respect between enemies, and he wouldn't forget this gesture. Crocodile was later defeated, and with that, any reason for Banklei and the Straw Hats to be enemies was gone. Banklei thought ahead and knew the Marines would be searching for the ship as they recovered, so hid it. And as the Straw Hats were preparing to leave, he called them up and told them about this. They were obviously angry and skeptical about him after everything he'd done, but they had no choice but to meet him as that was the only way to get their ship back. And he gave it back to them, just as he said he would, and told them that the reason he took it was to protect it from the Navy, and this quickly flipped their opinion completely back. It was as if nothing changed from when they first met, but Zoro revealed another motive. Mr. 2 wanted to ally with them to get off the island himself, as the Navy blockade was stopping him from leaving as well, so he wasn't completely reformed just yet. Despite their efforts, the Navy found their location and attacked them with all their might, but Usopp was able to sink one of their ships, which opened up a hole in their formation, and Banklei yelled out that this was their chance to escape, but the Straw Hats said they would stay behind. They said that they had to meet someone, but Banklei said that was suicide and was about to leave, until they told him they were going to pick up a friend. And this stopped Banklei in his tracks. Friendship is the most sacred thing to him, it's his core principle, and he values it over everything else, and knowing what was at stake now, he refused to leave. The Straw Hats were risking everything for a friend, and he couldn't abandon them while they were doing so. And he made the ultimate choice. He transformed into Luffy and started sailing off. All the Marines chased after his ship, but when they caught up, he revealed a trick. He declared that he was a friend of the Straw Hats, and went into battle to let them escape, risking his life and sacrificing everything. Luckily, he wasn't killed, he was captured, but was soon able to escape. He laid low for a while, even completely changing his look, and encountered Mr. 3. But nearby, Miss Valentine was captured, and Banklei went to rescue her, but was yet again captured himself. I think these cover stories are important. It shows that Banklei truly did learn a lot and turned over a new leaf since his sacrifice for the Straw Hats, and has been trying his best to grow and selflessly help people as much as possible. But unfortunately, this time the Marines wouldn't be so lenient. He was thrown in with Mr. 1, Mr. 3, and Crocodile, and all of them were transferred to Impel Down, the worst prison in the world, where he was sentenced to life. He was put into level 3, the Starvation Hell, a barren wasteland with sweltering heat and restricted food, meant to dry out the prisoners and put them in a constant state of starvation. But despite this bleak environment, with no hope of escape, Banklei was still his optimistic self, befriending the other prisoners on the level and choosing to spend his time dancing. His willpower and resolve is incredible. He never lets himself give in to despair, no matter how hopeless or horrific his situation is. Sometime after his capture, Mr. 3 and Buggy the Clown came to set him free, and after he got out of his cell, saw his dear friend Luffy, finally reuniting with him. Bonkley had heard from Buggy and Mr. 3 that Luffy wanted to meet someone at level 5, and he said he did too. He heard that his greatest idol Emporio Ivankov was in Impel Down, and with his reputation as the top commander of the Revolutionary Army had to be on the lowest floor, but the road to getting there would be long and incredibly dangerous. Regardless, Bonkley and Luffy breezed through level 3, defeating every guard they came across, until they climbed up the wall and looked down on level 4, the Inferno Hell. All of the burning heat on level 3 was just residual from the burning temperatures on level 4. They were attacked by another guard, and due to the power of Bonkley's kick, the floor collapsed and they fell down. Luckily, they missed the molten lava, but the heat was nearly unbearable. By this point, after weeks of starvation, Bonkley was extremely hungry, and of course Luffy was as well, so they ran towards the kitchens, but were intercepted by Magellan, the warden of Impel Down. Luffy didn't know who he was, but Bonkley knew all too well, as he'd probably heard horror stories about him, and he screamed for Luffy to not fight him. He had the Venom Fruit, one of the most lethal devil fruits in the world, with the power to inflict deadly poison with just a touch. Bonkley begged Luffy to run, but Magellan responded that all the exits were being guarded and there was no way out. With this, Magellan wasted no time attacking, even killing his own men in the process. He then struck out at Luffy and chased him around relentlessly, with Luffy not even being able to counterattack since he would be poisoned if he touched Magellan even once. During this, Bonkley slipped away and hid behind a corner. He had a choice to make: stay and help Luffy fight against the seemingly invincible Magellan, or run. And in this moment, the odds were too stacked against Luffy, so he chose to run. He was crying while he ran, devastated, but knowing there was no way to win, he thought there was no other choice. But he promised something: if Luffy survived, he would stop at nothing to save him. So when he heard he was, even if just barely, he had to go back. He tricked the Vice Warden with his power, got a copy of his face and transformed into him, and used his chance to get a copy of Magellan's face as well. He was told that Luffy was on level 5 and that there was no way to save him now, but Bonkley didn't care, and when asked why he would be willing to give up his life for Luffy, said that he was his friend, and that was the only reason he needed. He then transformed into the Vice Warden to meet with the Impel Down doctors and get an antidote for Magellan's poison, but was told that there was none, and that he was completely beyond saving. He was told that no one had ever survived the poison, that it would take a miracle, and it clicked for Bonkley. They needed a miracle, and there was only one person that could give them one: Ivankov. Bonkley was easily able to get down to level 5 as the Vice Warden, and got a list of the inmates, but when he found Ivankov's name, it was crossed out. He asked the guards why this was, and they said that on occasion, random prisoners would disappear, and the folklore behind it was that they were being dragged to the gates of hell itself. Bonkley had no time to think about this. Luffy's poison would kill him in less than 24 hours, so he had to press forward, and so stepped into the freezing hell of level 5. He quickly encountered wolves that were so ferocious they had to be put on this floor instead of the others, because they would have killed the other prison animals if they were put together, and Bonkley was left to fend them off by himself, but somehow he managed it, and slipped away to look for Luffy, and was able to find him. He asked for his forgiveness for running away before, but Luffy was barely conscious. He unlocked the cell and dragged him out and started to pull him around, looking for Ivankov. He never lost hope. He knew that his idol couldn't have fallen victim to this curse, and he believed that he was still performing miracles in Impel Down. He was their last hope, and all Bonkley could do was not give up. The wolves attacked him again, this time in huge numbers. He did well, taking out many of them, but combined with his hunger, injuries, and stamina running low, he struggled to hold them off any longer. They ruthlessly attacked him, biting into his flesh, but when it seemed like it was over, Luffy rose up and bit them back, then used his Conqueror's Haki to knock all of them out for what they did to his friend. Bonkley was surprised, but by this point they'd both run out of energy, and went unconscious. When he woke up, Bonkley found himself in a place completely alien to the rest of the prison. People were eating, drinking, and laughing, and this left Bonkley completely stunned. He thought he died and had woken up in paradise, but he was told that him and Luffy were rescued and brought here. He demanded to know where Luffy was, but was interrupted by the lights going out, and a person about to perform on stage. He explained to Bonkley that the guards were confused, and all the rumors about prisoners being taken to hell were wrong. Every single one of them had been taken here, to level 5.5, the prisoner's secret garden, New Kama Land. This man was the Emporio Ivankov that Bonkley had been idolizing for years. This whole time he really was working miracles, saving lives and creating a place of freedom inside the worst prison in the world. Bonkley was completely starstruck in meeting his idol, but didn't forget the urgent matter at hand. He begged Ivankov to save Luffy, but Ivankov said that they were outlaws and didn't save just anyone. That the reason they treated him was because Luffy, even while on his deathbed, begged them to save him. This touched Ivankov, and he felt that he had no choice but to treat both of them, and Bonkley was relieved. Luffy's treatment had started 10 hours before, but it was so painful and gruesome that he'd been screaming the entire time. Ivankov brought Bon Clay to where Luffy was, and he was heartbroken by this, and when he went to take a look, he was horrified. The treatment was tearing his body apart. Bon Clay was in tears and begged Ivankov to stop the bleeding and save him, but Ivankov slapped him. This treatment, however painful, was the only way Luffy could be saved. It was all based on his own willpower now. Ivankov said that he didn't help those who didn't want to help themselves. He was called a miracle worker, but miracles only happen to those that never give up, and even with that, Luffy still had 2 more days to go, but Ivankov said that Bon Clay needed to rest too, that he'd get him some food and a place to sleep, but he refused. He went to where Luffy was instead, and started cheering him on. How could he call himself a friend if he relaxed while Luffy was going through the worst agony of his life? No, he had to be there to support him no matter what. He screamed at the top of his lungs so Luffy wouldn't be alone. He screamed until his throat bled, but he kept going for 7 hours straight, but Luffy's screaming stopped. Blood poured out of the room, and Ivankov said that could only mean one thing: he was dead. Bon Clay was beyond devastated and started crying his eyes out, but after that brief silence, Luffy yelled out for food. He didn't die. Instead, the treatment was complete after just 20 hours, and Bon Clay felt the biggest wave of relief of his entire life. Luffy proceeded to eat several days worth of New Kama's food supply, but he was fully recovered. Luffy was happy to see that Bon Clay was also fine, but everything that happened drained all the energy he had, and he finally passed out. Ivankov told Luffy what he'd done for him, and he bowed down to the floor and thanked him for everything. When Bon Clay woke up, Ivankov gave him an energy boost with his devil fruit, and they all began making their escape from the prison. After fighting tooth and nail, battling hundreds of guards, dodging Magellan, Blackbeard, and more, they were able to reach the exit, but this was when they encountered a problem: the Gate of Justice. The only way they could leave was through the gate, which could only be opened from the inside of Impel Down. This meant that someone had to stay behind in order for the others to leave, and Bon Clay didn't hesitate to volunteer. He told Jinbei not to tell Luffy until after they went through the gate, so that the communications would be cut. Bon Clay didn't want a huge tearful goodbye, he just wanted to do what was right for his friend. He didn't need the affirmation or thanks, he did it because it was right. So he disguised himself as Magellan and gave the order for the gates to be opened, but right before the ship passed through, Luffy called him. He was shocked as he told Jinbei not to tell him, but Luffy said they were supposed to escape together, that he always helps him but he never gets a chance to pay him back. Everyone else who'd escaped heard this and all started thanking him and begging him to say something. And right when the gates were about to close, he had to answer. With tears in his eyes, he thanked Luffy and told him to save his brother, and that he knew he could do it. And the connection cut off. He turned to Magellan, and before making his last stand, he hoped that him and Luffy would meet again as soon as possible. Though it seemed like Magellan would kill him, Bon Clay was spared, presumably thrown into a lower level than before, level 4 or maybe even 5, but 2 years later, we see that he made his way back to New Kama Land and became their new leader, taking over his idol Ivankov's place and being able to find his happy ending. We don't know where he'll go from here. His wish to meet Luffy again is reassuring, and hopefully they will reunite sometime in the future, but for now, Bon Clay can rest and live his dreams in paradise. Bon Clay is a much darker and more complex character than people give him credit for. He's not the perfect person he's often made out to be. He's done horrible things, he's had moments of fear and doubt, but I think this side of him only improves him as a character. To be able to redeem his horrible actions and come back to his principles, no matter how scared he is, willing to sacrifice everything for his friends, truly makes him one of the greatest characters Oda has ever put to paper.